Bourdain, and in terms of whether what was the cause of his death. I had a Psychology Today blog column, and I believe talking about Anthony Bourdain's death was my number one hit. You know, it got, I don't know, hundreds of thousands, millions. And I talked about Anthony Bourdain dying from a love addiction. So they've just released, HBO has just released a film, a couple hours, maybe an hour and 50 minutes long, called Roadrunner. And I'll just read the descriptions of it. A film about Anthony Bourdain is an intimate, behind-the-scenes look at how an anonymous chef became a world-renowned cultural icon. He wrote a book. He was a chef, and then he wrote a book, Kitchen Confidential, which is already, think about it. You know, he wasn't like a world-famous chef, but he was a high-end chef who has the guts to write a bestseller. Here's another write-up. Filmmaker Morgan Neville examines the uncommon life of world-traveling chef, writer, and icon Anthony Bourdain, who lived his life unabashedly. Does that word unabashedly do anything for you, Zach? I mean, when you hear the word unabashedly, what's that say to you?
It's despite what the world may tell you to do otherwise.
It sort of says like daring, and let's jump to the end. He killed himself.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, this is a little before your time, I think. No death, maybe of any human being in the world, certainly of any public figure, affected me more. I mean, before that, there was John Lennon, and before that, there was JFK. And I identify with Anthony Bourdain. I mean, obviously, millions of people, I don't know if they identified with him, but they liked him. I liked him. He was so out there, and he just didn't follow conventional paths. And number one, he talked about Kitchen Confidential was sort of half about things that happen in the kitchen, and you should be warned about them if you're like going to a restaurant. And half of about it was like his drug use. So Bourdain said, I'm just picking this out of somewhere, said drugs influenced his decisions that he sent a busboy to Alphabet City, some part of New York, to obtain cannabis, methaqualone, cocaine, LSD, psilocybin mushrooms, secobarbital, tunol, amphetamine, cocaine, and heroin. So already, gosh, that's a wide variety of drugs. You know what I mean? And he was famous. People sort of thought, well, he was a heroin addict, but he was also into cocaine and all kinds of, psychedelics, which is already, it was an unusual mix. And so somewhere he wrote, I did not want for love or attention. My parents loved me. Neither of them drank to excess. Nobody beat me. God was never mentioned, so I was annoyed by neither church nor any notion of sin or damnation. And so he's sort of like doing away with trauma. Well, my father, they were divorced. They were, he came from a middle-class home. Bourdain's mother, Gladys Bourdain, was a New York Times writer, for God's sake. And his father, it's hard to figure out his father. His father's French. And he was a salesman at a New York City camera store, which is a nothing job. And then a floor manager at a record store. And then he became an executive for Columbia Records. So how did that happen? You don't have a guy selling cameras on 42nd Street. Now he's doing record contracts. But they don't interview Bourdain's mother or father in the film Roadrunner. And, I guess maybe they said, no, thanks. But his mother, Gladys, said, he is absolutely the last person in the world I would ever have dreamed would do something like this. And, I was pretty much in that same ballpark. Here's a guy who had just conquered the world. Of course, he's tall and good looking. He was about 61 or 62 when he died. And he had been in and out of rehab, but he still smoked marijuana and he drank, and sometimes he would get drunk on screen. And in the interview, in the film, one of his friends said, "You're the only person I know who quit cold turkey." Do you know what he meant by cold turkey? Because that's not exactly, cold turkey means you just quit like that. Mm-hmm. What he meant, the friend who was, I think, a musician, I don't remember, but he was somebody who had been in rehab himself. He meant, well, you sort of quit on your own. Even though he had been in rehab, he just quit some other way. And now I have to jump to the end. An awful lot of people assume that when he committed suicide, it had to do with drugs. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of like the Trump election. They still think that. But he had a zero toxicology in terms of illicit drugs. They said he had some pharmaceuticals in him. I don't know what that means, whether he's taking therapeutic drugs. So one of the people that he talked to in the film, he had a lot of friends. He was with a good friend of his when he committed suicide, a famous chef that he was just great friends with. But they had one thing where he was interviewed, he was talking with Iggy Pop. Do you know anything about Iggy Pop?
Yeah, a little bit.
He's a little before your time. He was the guy who throw himself around on stage and harm himself. Mm-hmm. I'm just reading from somewhere. Iggy made an art of excess, self-mutilation, self-exposure, and self-destruction. And of course, he had drugs and alcohol in there. And in this interaction, Bourdain says, you're obviously in a better place now. What happened? And I'm thinking, I'm watching it and I'm going, oh man, is he going to do AA? And Iggy Pop said, I learned to let people love me. And I thought, not bad.
Pretty good.
And Bourdain, you can see the reason they put it in there, Bourdain goes, not bad. So anyhow, he had begun not recently a relationship with a woman, beautiful woman, 20 years younger, a talented woman named Asia Asante. And to a large extent, the film is about their relationship. And the film was about Anthony Bourdain's relationships in general. And they describe, he married a woman when he met at high school, named Nancy Putkoski. He described her as a bad girl, older than him and part of a druggy crowd. And she was the year before him, and he followed her to Vassar College. And then, he was there a year or two and he quit, but he married her. And somebody said, well, he was a romantic, by which they meant, well, he met a woman, when he was like 17 and he married her and they stayed married, for 10 years, for 20 years. They didn't divorce until 2005 and they met, they got married, somewhere in the maybe 80s. Do you have any feeling about people who marry their high school sweetheart? Do you have any rule of thumb or gut reaction when you hear that?
It's not something I would do or recommend. How about that?
Me too. There may be people who met people in high school and stayed married. And so they called him a romantic because he thought he could marry a woman that he met first in high school, and they did adventurous things together. I mean, I don't call that romantic. Do you have how would you call it? I mean, what do you think that indicates about a person that they marry their high school sweetheart? Do you feel that's a sign of something?
Leading the witness. No, yeah, engulfed is maybe more what you would say. You know, I think that's the nice thing about a good relationship, if you're really a romantic, is that you're together and you're interested in watching each other grow, and that means they're turning into something different. But marrying your high school sweetheart, or the idea that you projecting out what that person's going to be years and years from now, and what that means for you, gets you pretty close to the makings of something like a love addiction or a destructive relationship.
I think that way. I mean, I wrote Love and Addiction based on people I knew in high school and college. It's a premature stapling yourself down. It says to me that you want security because, and Anthony Bourdain was, everybody knows who he is. He's about 6'2", thick head of hair, really good looking guy, but he wasn't, and he's daring and gets in trouble. But I don't believe he was a player with women.
Mm-hmm.
He was a nailer down with women. And so the fact that he was married to his high school sweetheart is a warning sign. So they got divorced in 2005. And then in 2007, he married Ottavia Busia. She's interviewed a lot in the film. And I'm just, impressed with her. She's a very self-possessed woman. And they had a daughter who was born in 2007. So I think that makes her 15-ish now. And she's in the film and she said something like, well, this is the last time I'm going to do this, and I mean, you better interview me. And she, and she said she felt guilty. They kept up a friend. Well, they had a daughter together and they kept up a friendship. So she felt a little guilty that he committed suicide doing a show in France. The couple separated in 2016. He quit smoking in 2007, which is the year he married her and they had a daughter. So naturally, you think, okay, guy still drinks, still smokes marijuana, but smoking cigarettes, that's a thing when you have a daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So the couple separated in 2016. And Bourdain met the Italian actress Asia Argento in 2016 while filming the Rome episode of Parts Unknown. That was his second show. That was with CNN. He developed the On the Road show about eating food where he talked to people, got immersed in the culture, ate anything, sometimes got drunk, hung out, and talked to everybody. And so we met her in 2016. He's going to kill himself in 2017. It's like the clock is ticking. Well, I'm sorry. Let me see. He died. I'm sorry. He committed suicide in 2018.
Yeah.
Thanks. And so she emerged. She was about 42, beautiful, talented. She's an actress, but she did TV shows, kind of live TV shows. And she was also a director. Her father was a director. So she became a spokesperson for Me Too. And she announced at the 2018 Cannes Film Festival that she had been raped by Harvey Weinstein when she was 19. And Bourdain got all in around that. And they don't deal with this, I don't think, in the film. There was a little downside to that. She had sex with an underage kid. And Bourdain paid that kid $380,000 to keep his mouth shut. So, he had met her, I hope I have my dates, or he met her in 2016. And in 2017, he was so into her, he paid a $380,000 settlement. So in 2018, he supported her through the Me Too period. The director of his show got sick, and so he brought Asia Argento in to direct. So these are just some comments of the people. When Tony met Asia, he was like, she's the best. My God, she's so great. Now he's 61 or 62 years old. Like high school when you get late for the first time. Steed was one of the directors, says in the documentary, the relationship quickly escalated with the chef turned TV personality gushing about Argento in interviews and on Instagram, publicly championing her as she emerged from a Me Too leader, privately playing off Argento's own accuser, and even pushing for his girlfriend to direct an episode of Parts Unknown when the other director fell ill. And this is in the film. I wrote my blog post, What Killed Anthony Bourdain? And I said it was love addiction. Another Parts Unknown coworker they interviewed theorizes that Bourdain, a recovering heroin addict, turned a lifelong addictive personality to another person, and that was extremely dangerous. So I don't like to do addictive personalities because Anthony Bourdain was a guy who quit heroin and everything else, and he quit smoking when he had a kid, and he was very dedicated to his kid. The mother of the child said he was a devoted father. So he told People magazine he was happier with Argento in his life. It's nice to be with somebody who I see as a peer. During a final interview with the magazine, he said he was happy in ways that I have not been in memory, and happy in ways that I don't think I ever would be for sure. He attributed these feelings to someone really strong, Argento. Gosh, there's a lot going on that. I mean, here you are watching a guy with a daughter, incredibly successful. He seems to have fun with people. And he's been making these video trips for over 10 years. He had a tight-knit working crew. And so it's very challenging to say, well, why would somebody like that commit suicide? And what I'm tracking out of this documentary, how for whatever reason, he became into cemented relationships with strong women, powerful women, and he became totally committed to them. When you're 62 and you start dating a 42-year-old woman and you've known her for a year, to put your whole life in that basket is a tricky business. And when she directed an episode in Hong Kong, the Parts Unknown crew were stunned that Bourdain was so quickly turned to a new method with her. And one of the people, Zach Zamboni, was his longtime cinematographer, the camera guy. And he'd been working with him for 10 years and he fired him. And Parts Unknown producer Helen Cho told Neville, the guy who made the film, when Tony fired Zach, it was a huge red flag. Do you know what she meant by that? Or can you see where she was going with that?
That it was a huge red flag. Hold on, let me see.
So he fired a long
Yeah,
time, a
yeah.
guy he'd been working with for 10 years.
He's not the kind of guy who makes waves in relationships or ends relationships. If that's happening, then that's a chasm in his existence. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. He's willing to throw out. I mean, he's met a talented, beautiful woman. She has her own style of directing. He's been working with people for 10 years.
And he'll junk it for her.
Right.
Yeah.
He'll fire the guy. And one of, Cho was another director or assistant director. And she said it woke everybody up. It's like, don't get in the way of this relationship or you're toast. But he called the making of the Hong Kong episode the most intensely satisfying experience of my professional life. And he got a tattoo. As you might have guessed, I have an Asia Argento tattoo. Huh. So now we're in June 2018, which is not long after this whole Hong Kong. And he's working on a new episode of Parts Unknown in Strasbourg with the frequent collaborator and friend, Eric Rippert. He had good friends, people who really cared about him. I mean, you can see how broken up they were. And while he was there in Strasbourg, somebody took pictures of Asia Asante Argento, forgive me, hanging out with another guy in Rome. And then Bourdain committed suicide on June 8th, 5 days after the photos of her with the guy in Rome appeared.
He had just gone all in, relationships, work, everything, to appease what he thought was, the single pillar of his life.
At the age of 61, and that woman Cho was sort of the conscience of the picture. His daughter was 11. By the way, he started smoking again towards the end. It's almost as though, well, he wasn't taking heroin or cocaine or psilocybin or anything. It's almost like he was tense. And that's just a hard thing to deal with. He killed himself while he had an 11-year-old daughter. What did it take to do that? How much of a disregard for not only himself, but the people closest to him did that represent? It's stunning to me. But addiction is something, you saw me being interviewed or giving a webinar for Addiction Theory Network. And one of the organizers is a man who doesn't believe in addiction.
Yeah.
And I say, there's some people who behave in a way. If you didn't believe in addiction, you'd have to make up a new word and it would have to mean the same thing as addiction. Mm-hmm. There's some people who just can't disconnect themselves from something, even when it gives them some kind of negative feedback, and they can't continue to exist without it. And the worst example of that, people get over heroin. Well, he got over heroin, and sometimes they go to prison. And they generally don't kill themselves if they can't get heroin. He is in this relationship and to see her with another man, and he hanged himself within a day or two. So I don't know what you want to call it. I wrote a book called Love and Addiction in 1975. And this film, the Neville film, Roadrunner, seems to be a big lead up to that point. It certainly gives, and some of the commentators say he gave up everything for her. It was like he was just a newborn baby. And they make it a continuity with the heroin addiction. I would say, I would have hoped that he had gotten to a point in his life where he was able to give up heroin. He gave up smoking for his newborn, for his daughter. She wasn't newborn by this time. He's a person who had matured enough and developed enough confidence in himself. And let's go back to Iggy Pop. Iggy Pop was famous for throwing himself off the stage and for jabbing himself with needles. He was the worst. And he said, well, I got to a point where I let people love me. And somehow that didn't happen for Anthony Bourdain.
I've worked with a lot of kids who they develop a connection. They're the kind of kids who spiral out of control and their behaviors, whatever, problematic, and people think, what can we even do to help this person? And sometimes I see them latch on to a single person. And it seems like that person that they're latching on to is a good mentor for them, and that gets them some connection in the world. And before I met you, I always saw that as A, good, B, bad if the only source of gratification is that single person who's acting as a mentor for them. And I have watched, those relationships between kids, as soon as that one child is kind of sick of the other one tagging along, that goes awry really quickly. And not only does the person regress, but they do all sorts of unpredictable stuff. And so I wouldn't label a child addicted, because children naturally are learning about the world, and their worldview widens and their perception of self also widens. But it sure gets close to that concept. And it's a microcosm of that concept. So I understand what you're saying deeply.
The people you're doing with their children, their kids or teenagers. And so you might say that's part of the developmental process.
Yes. It's a secure sort of attachment to other people around you, social. Yeah.
And you hope that they learn, kind of contradictory things. One, that you can't just attach yourself to somebody and that's a life. But on the other hand, you're thinking they're going to learn to make better intimate connections in life, maybe
Right.
more sharing.
Right. Like there's something to sharing existence with somebody else who has a different perception, but maybe understands you. And there's something too far about doing that, with a single person and then eliminating everything else. Yeah.
And it's one of the developmental stages, if you go to Eric Erickson, the 7 stages of human beings, intimacy is one of them, and you're interacting with the kid for a certain point around school, but you're conscious that that's one thing you want them to stretch into.
Right.
And here's a 61-year-old man who's firing people he's lived with for 10 years, goes back to smoking, and seems to be willing to forget his love for his daughter. Something that's a normal developmental thing, people going haywire. And they pointed that out. They said it was like his first girlfriend in high school. Mm-hmm. Something that works or just as natural when you're 18 or 24 even is very, very disturbing. And his coworkers were very disturbed by it for a man who was 61. So there's no, he was a man who had a lot of talent. A lot of people, they interviewed a ton of people who cared about him. They didn't interview his mother or father, but they showed some clip of his mother somewhere. He had caring parents. Oh, they interviewed his brother a lot. He spent summers in France. His father was French, and that's part of where he learned, that cuisine thing. What went wrong for Anthony Bourdain? Could it have been Could his friends have done anything? Was there any pathway out of this? I mean, he was there with one of his best friends, a fellow chef that he was extremely close to. Eric Rippert was his name. And they were working together. They had dinner or breakfast that day or the day and the night before. So anyhow, there's a mystery at the bottom of this that, we couldn't solve if we were in the middle of it, and we're not in the middle of it. I'm just watching it and reading about it. But love is the worst addiction.
For sure.
And Anthony Bourdain died of love addiction.
I remember where I was going with this. There's, I think I've told you that there was a teenage person I was working with who smoked marijuana, and then people sent him into this counseling thing. And a couple of years later, he was meeting with administrators around the person. And what I had seen from this person up to that date recently was he wasn't a guy that really did drugs anyway, but he smoked one time and got kicked out to a counseling thing. And when people were asking, well, how's he doing? They remembered this drug thing. And so everyone said he's doing great. And I had a beat on that because I thought he was doing horribly, because he was actually interacting with this woman. He had a girlfriend, and he sort of did what you described Bourdain is doing. So now I was talking before about younger kids, maybe elementary school, but now there is a part of intimate relationships where a person has a responsibility as an adult to a 17-year-old kid or whatever he was, to ask him some questions about or help guide him so that he can balance intimate relationships with other things in his life. And when people think about addiction, they think, it's so drug-centered that they think that that's the thing they need to swat out of the air, rather than being inquisitive. As in the previous podcast, you mentioned, you need to be able to question and be alert to the things that are going on now when you're questioning them, so you can steer someone one direction or another. So I don't know what it is that, I know what the responsibility of adults in that school were to that child. That was obvious to me. I'm not exactly sure what the responsibility was or what his friends could have done to steer him one way or another, but I'm sure there was something that could have been done if people could wrap their heads around that concept. So
one thing, our perspective, which you and I share very strongly. So you're saying in the school, they said, oh, he stopped smoking marijuana. Great. And you're sitting there saying, well, what's his relationship to life like?
Right.
And you're looking at a relationship he might have. And sometimes it's the person who gets the person clean, or it's AA.
Yeah, right.
And you're saying, well, wait, drugs, schmugs, I'm talking about addiction.
Right.
In Carl Hart's terms, it's not the drugs, but in your and my terms, it's addiction is not about drugs. Addiction is a way of relating to the world. And you're focusing, well, this guy's in an unhealthy relationship, this kid, that's still a problem. I'm not going to celebrate that he's not taking drugs anymore. And with Anthony Bourdain, the version that takes is, well, he's still really addicted, even though he's not taking drugs.
Right.
Drugs. But, we're looking at it per se. Is this current relationship or involvement addictive? Forget drugs.
Right.
He took a lot of drugs, but that's over.
So, right. That's the tie-in for me, is that it's something that you've mentioned right away, is that even before the toxicology report came out, I remember you saying, one way or another, this isn't totally drug-centered. Maybe he was doing drugs, maybe he was doing them destructively. I don't know. My hunch is it's not. And, Carl would say the same thing, but it's not who cares what the drugs he's taking or not taking. People are missing the mark. And that's how I see it too. I see it from all the depth of the lifespan. Yeah.
And if we do anything in our little podcasts or our program, it's to say addiction's not about drugs. Addiction exists. It's a destructive involvement. Get your head out of the drug world and thinking about this.
Well said.
All right, Zach. Another time well spent. See you soon.
See you soon, Stan.